At the Wesley Center, we believe that your story always intersects with my story, and our story always intersects with the larger story when we linger long enough in the telling of truths that matter.
Environments like this are so meaningful because we can ask questions, both practical and spiritual. We can sit with those questions because process is also a thing that's not always prioritized. And out of that, we get to see things that are generative and life-giving and considerate and careful and caring and beautiful come forward.
And from that moment, from that relationship, I started to explore like all those questions that I had as a kid, all the questions that I currently have, and found the answers in the beautiful small streams that are out there, that aren't actually the large whooshing river that most white Christianity lives in, and found the most beautiful water I've ever tasted, right? Of like liberation and freedom. And from that moment, that's when I actually met Jesus.
But we didn't find each other in the church house. That wasn't a thing that happened. We found each other, on things like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and are still finding each other because there are new people that I meet all the time. And they form not just like my community, but like my spiritual community, because like we are spiritual beings connecting with one another, regardless of like what those beliefs that we hold around religion or faith or whatever are. Like, we're kinfolk trying to figure out like how we live into that sense that we belong to one another.
Understanding that everybody's seeking liberation, right? And all of our liberation plights were intertwined there. So we needed to show up for one another and be understanding of one another and offer community to one another.
I talked to a lot of Unitarian and Mennonite and Beloved and Quaker communities. And the one thing I like to say to them is I do this work because I love my people. And I think that white folks need to start doing this work because they love their people. And that, unfortunately, I know means loving the white supremacist brothers and sisters as well, like the relatives, right? But that needs to happen. We don't need people to come into our spaces anymore. Actually, we need white folks to like stand up and go into those spaces and fix those things. That would be so amazing. I would love to see that happen.
We're getting to a place where like a lot more white people are finding themselves coming off the sideline and thrust more into like the real game of like racial politics and being a part of this movement. And one thing that I often invite, not just white people, but non-Black people in general to consider when you participate is who is your participation for? Who does it benefit? Who does it serve?
But I came to the realization that we're not going to be saved, and that any work of liberation would be our own. That it wasn't going to come from beyond us, but that it would only come through us.
So like I would say, learn to listen to Black people, learn to evaluate whether or not what you're doing is actually helping Black people, and have thick enough skin to be corrected, and know that at some point you're bound to be corrected.
The first time was when Oscar Grant, a Black man, was killed by police at Fruitville Station in Oakland, and everyone just went to the streets. Just immediately, everyone was in the streets, and we were lined up with riot police, and I was praying. The energy was so intense. I just kept feeling like this is what it means when the scripture says, for God so loved the world. For God so loved the world that all these people are out here saying, we're going to be alive.
And ultimately, we're not all free until we're all free. And that includes for cis-straight white people who need to be freed from these terrible systems too. But that means that we're actually all in this together. And that's not just for the oppressed.
I really believe in reclaiming these things because I think it's helpful for us to say, no, we're not lousy human beings, but we need to return to our source and to our planet and to ourselves and reorient ourselves when we have missed the mark. And it's okay to be a little humbled by that.
I've come back to what I said at the beginning, that I still think now that the world is a beautiful place and everybody can do whatever they want to do, even in the midst of chaos, even in the midst of evil, in the midst of, white supremacy, xenophobia, queerphobia, ableism, everything. That one doesn't negate the other. And in fact, I've experienced that we need more joy in our lives, more kindness, like you open with, right? In order to be able to sustain ourselves for the long haul.
Just never give up. That's what I tell myself. That's what I tell my family. That's what I tell my congregation. Never give up. There's always hope. There's always there's always hope in people. There's always hope when the sun rises in the morning. There's always hope. So never give up.
And continue to reject a state of being afraid, which I think is a static state, one that keeps us bound to the status quo, bound to everything that we have been taught to believe is true, that is kind of a binding to normativity.
That just, pace yourself. Take breaks when you need it, because, right, the fight is a marathon, not a sprint. And that Black people have to be in this for life.
I encounter the spirit, the divine, most intensely when I come to the end of myself, to the end of my own abilities to know what I don't know, to make something happen, to not have just made the terrible mistake I just made. All of those things, those are the places where I have had the most tender, just overwhelmingly beautiful experiences of some kind of spirit of grace.
But what does it mean, seriously, for you to cultivate pockets of rest for people in your world? Places where they can finally breathe and be free from the violence that this world hits them with right and left, subtle and overt. What can you do? Because you do have the capacity to do something.
God in my imaging now is more like a spider web. Strands of connection between that are easy to break. That doesn't mean the web's not there, but it can be harmed. And it's also really strong when it's attended to and spun and knit. And that's how I think about the divine now.
And so now, as you go forth into your one wild and precious lives, may your hearts be vulnerable to beauty and to the pain of each other. May your minds be open to truth and questioning injustice. And may your hearts and souls and lives be centered in the practice of remembering, of tending, of giving, of receiving, and of being present to all that is before us, luring us into possibilities.